All right, I want to invite you to pause for a moment. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, take this in. We have hit 50 episodes of Pleasure in the Pause. That's right, 50 conversations about pleasure, menopause, midlife empowerment, and sexuality. 50 moments that have expanded our minds, shifted our perspectives, and made us say, wait, why didn't I know this before? Now, I want you to think back. How much have you learned since you started listening to this podcast? How has your relationship with your body changed? Maybe you've started asking different questions. Maybe you've felt that little flicker of desire, of curiosity, of self-awareness waking up inside of you. Maybe you've realized that pleasure is something you are allowed to want, to have, to claim. If you're nodding your head right now, let me tell you, you are not alone. This community is made up of thousands of women just like you, women who are ready to rewrite the story we've been told about midlife and pleasure, women who are done settling for silence and ready to start advocating for themselves in and out of the bedroom. So today we are celebrating. We're taking a journey through some of the most game-changing, perspective-shifting conversations we've had on this podcast so far. And let me tell you, I'm not just going to tell you about them. Oh no, I'm going to replay for you some of the most eye-opening, mind-expanding moments from these conversations. These are the words that made us see our bodies differently. These are the insights that helped us feel more empowered with knowledge, more confident to step into midlife and reclaim our pleasure. These are the conversations that changed everything. Welcome to Pleasure in the Pause, the podcast dedicated to empowering midlife women to connect to their bodies, pleasure, and power in perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. I am your host, Gabriella Espinosa, women's health and sexual wellness coach, and it is my pleasure to be here with you today. 50 episodes. Wow. Can you believe it? We've had 50 conversations about pleasure, menopause, sexuality, and the deep transformative wisdom of our bodies. And let me tell you, it has been an incredible ride. But do you know what makes this milestone even more special? You. This beautiful, brilliant, curious, courageous community of women who have said yes. Yes to learning. Yes to unlearning. Yes to rewriting the stories we were told about pleasure and aging and what it means to be a woman in midlife. If you've been here since the beginning, thank you for being part of this movement. If you're new, welcome. You are right where you need to be. So if you're ready to remember and reclaim the pleasure that is yours, then let's dive in. Welcome. For those of you who are just joining us, let me tell you what we do here. Pleasure in the Pause is a space for women in midlife who are ready to reconnect with their bodies, awaken their pleasure, and step into their full power. This is where we have the conversations that no one ever had with us growing up. This is where we dismantle shame and replace it with knowledge. This is where we bring science and wisdom together so that every woman knows the truth. Your body is not the problem. You were never broken. And pleasure is your birthright. Now, before we go any further, I have to take a moment to say thank you. Because this podcast, this community, it wouldn't exist without you. Every message, every email, every time you've shared an episode with a friend and said, girl, you need to hear this. That is what makes this work so powerful. And I want you to know, I hear you. I hear you when you say, I thought I was the only one. I hear you when you say, I wish I had learned this years ago. And I hear you when you say, this podcast changed the way I see myself. That is what keeps me going. That is why we are here. And today, as we celebrate 50 episodes, we are going to revisit 5 of the most powerful, game-changing conversations we've had on this show. These are the episodes that have left women saying, my whole world just shifted. And we're going to listen back to some of the most unforgettable moments together. But before we get into these highlights, let me take a moment to reflect. You see, when I started this podcast, I wanted to start a conversation about all the things I wish I had known when I was going through perimenopause and menopause. Because for me, it was like the light to my libido switched off and I was left totally in the dark. I had no language or understanding to communicate what I was feeling. And quite frankly, I felt a lot of shame. I thought I was getting old and then my sex life was over. I didn't know that I would become the expert of my own body, that I would have to unlearn decades of misinformation just to reclaim what was already mine. And that's when I knew if I was feeling this way, other women must be feeling this way too. And I wasn't willing to stay silent about it. So I started talking. I started learning. I started bringing in the most brilliant minds in sexual health, menopause, and embodiment. And I created the podcast I wish I had when I was searching for the answers. So here we are, 50 episodes later. And what I've learned, what I know to be true is this. We are not meant to just get through midlife. We are meant to thrive in it. We are meant to enjoy it. We are meant to feel pleasure, to feel connection, to feel alive. And that is why these conversations matter. One of my favorite messages came from a woman who told me she had gone years without connecting with her partner, without feeling desire. And she thought it was just how it was going to be until she listened to one episode of this podcast and suddenly something shifted. She realized she wasn't broken. She realized that there were real solutions and she realized she could feel desire again. And now she's waking up to herself in ways she never thought possible. And that's why we're here. That is why these conversations matter. And that is why today we're going back to the episodes that shook us to our core and set us free. Let's talk about pleasure. And I mean real, full body, deep, expansive pleasure. The kind that so many of us don't even realize we have access to. Because here's the thing. Most women have been given an incomplete map to their own pleasure. We've been taught that the clitoris is just a little external nub. But oh, my friends, this is just the tip of the iceberg. That's where Sheri Winston comes in. She is a pioneer in the field of women's sexuality and the author of Women's Anatomy of Arousal, the most incredible guidebook to female pleasure I've ever encountered. And in our conversation, she revealed something that completely changed the way we think about female pleasure. Women have just as much erectile tissue as men. It's just hidden. It's internal. And when we learn how to activate all of it, our pleasure potential expands in ways we never imagined. Let me take you back to this moment from our conversation. You mentioned the female erectile network. I would love for you to talk about that and how it differs from male bodies. I would love our listeners to learn more about that. What does it look like, feel like? How do we access it?
The things that we start with are the things we know and on the outside, and that would be the head of the clitoris. So this is just one part of the clitoris right there. Now, for some women, it's going to be under the hood. Some women, it's out, all normal. And what I'd like to suggest to women is that you actually go on a tour of your own anatomy. And again, you can read about this in the book or in the course, but I want you to find and feel all the parts I'm talking. And that way you'll become your own expert. And that way nobody can tell you, oh, you don't have it. Because you'll know, oh yeah, I felt it. I know that I have it. But in order to do that, you're going to have to go through the journey of arousal because all the parts we're talking about are made of erectile tissue. So when it's not engorged, it's small and soft and squishy. We're not going to find most of it. We'll find the head of the clitoris. That one's easy. But a lot of the rest of the stuff is going to change. So I do recommend that you do your home play assignment of going on this little tour in 3 stages. Check it all out when you're not engorged, not aroused. Play with yourself, get medium level aroused. Check it out again. Play with yourself more, get all the way, almost having an orgasm. Check it out again. And I really suggest that you not just feel, but that you look, you get up. light and a magnifying mirror. You can use your phone, but see what is there. And then if you have a partner, take them on a tour the next time. The first time, go by yourselves. And what you might notice is you actually got these kind of circuits. You've got a cuff of erectile tissue that goes around the vagina and a second overlapping, interlocking circuit of erectile tissue up here. So you've got these overlapping, interlocking circuits of erectile tissue. And if you want to have the best arousal, if you want to have the best orgasms, you want that whole network activated. One of the things that's different about female and male erectile tissue is a penis, it's kind of an all or nothing system. You can't have the head be hard and the shaft be soft. It doesn't work that way. Either the whole thing is hard, the whole thing might be semi-hard, but you can't have one part hard and one part soft. With the female erectile network, because they are separate but connected structures, you can get aroused and orgasmic with just part of this network activated. And I think probably my experience is not uncommon, but for many years when I first became sexually active, I was having some orgasms sometimes with clitoral stimulation, which was great. I'm all for it. There's no bad orgasms. It's not the wrong way to have an orgasm, but it was like singing and playing the guitar. It sounded great. It was beautiful music, but it wasn't until I had the whole band playing, right? The whole orchestra activated that I realized how much bigger and broader and more depth and more variation and more pleasure was available when you get the whole thing working for you.
Yes, yes, yes. Sheri's analogy of the erotic orchestra is something that has stayed with me ever since this episode. She teaches us that pleasure isn't just about one single note. It's about learning how to play the whole symphony. It's about giving ourselves permission to explore our own pleasure, to take our time, to expand our arousal. And let's be real, nobody ever taught us this. We were given the fast food version of sex education, where pleasure was an afterthought. But Sheri reminds us that our bodies are wired for pleasure. And when we take the time to explore, to engage, to awaken all parts of our erotic network, we open up entirely to new levels of intimacy and satisfaction. And this leads to our next guest, because what Sheri taught us about pleasure, Dr. Rachel Rubin teaches us about the medical field's massive blind spot when it comes to women's sexual health. This conversation was a wake-up call, and I promise you, you don't want to miss it. I'm talking about episode number 21, Redefining Sexual Medicine and Education for Midlife Women, with urologist and sexual medicine expert, Dr. Rachel Rubin. Now, I want you to imagine walking into your doctor's office and being handed a mirror instead of a prescription. Imagine a world where sexual health for women wasn't treated as an afterthought, but as an essential part of our overall well-being. Sounds revolutionary? Right. Well, that's exactly what Dr. Rachel Rubin is fighting for. She's a board-certified urologist and sexual medicine specialist who is on a mission to change the way doctors talk about and treat women's sexual health. And in our conversation, she dropped a fact that stopped me in my tracks. Medical schools barely teach doctors about menopause and female sexual health. This means that most doctors don't even have the training to help us. Take a listen to this moment.
By not knowing, by not looking at your own genitals and how they change, how can you advocate for them? How can you experience maximal pleasure with your partner? How can you even know what to ask the doctor if you don't even know what is going on down there? So one of the ways I think about it is your face, okay? Think about you have a beautiful face, right? Think about how many parts of it's not just a face. You have a nose, you have eyes, you have eyebrows, which are kind of weird when you think of eyebrows in general. Like, why do we have random hair right here on our face? You have lips, you have teeth, you have a tongue, you have ears. And you know what? You have a different doctor for every gosh darn part of your face. There is a nose doctor, a separate eye doctor, there's a separate teeth doctor. Like, we go to like 10 doctors just for our face. And down there, we go to no doctors, right? You go to a gynecologist to help with your cervix and your uterus and making babies. But what about your labia majora and your clitoris and your labia minora or your urethra? What about your pelvic floor? You have multiple body parts down there. And so that's the point of when I give women a mirror in my office and everyone gets a mirror. They don't have to, but I really encourage it. I literally say to them, right? I say, this is your labia majora. This is your labia minora. This is the clitoris. This is the hood to your clitoris. This is your vulvar vestibule. That's the urethra, the tube you pee through. This is your pelvic floor. I give them all of this knowledge so that when something hurts, they say, well, it doesn't just hurt down there. It hurts in my clitoris, Dr. Rubin. It hurts in my pelvic floor, Dr. Rubin. Actually, Dr. Rubin, it hurts in the vulvar vestibule. When they have language, then we have solutions.
This is why so many of us have gone to our doctors with concerns about libido, dryness, or pain during sex, only to be told that's just part of aging. Have a glass of wine and relax. No, no, that's not the answer. What Dr. Rubin teaches us is that there are real medical solutions. There are hormonal treatments. There are therapies that work. But if doctors aren't trained in them, we have to become our own best advocates. This is why we need conversations like these. And it's why we need more women like Denise Pines, who is taking menopause mainstream and making sure the next generation doesn't have to fight for answers the way we did. I'm talking about episode number 25, M Factor, Shredding the Silence on Menopause with Denise Pines. For decades, menopause has been something women just get through. We've been told to suffer in silence. But let me tell you, silence does not serve us. Denise Pines is on a mission to change all of that. She is the powerhouse behind The M Factor, a groundbreaking documentary that shines a light on menopause, the myths, the misinformation, and the medical neglect. And in this episode, she shared a moment that stopped me in my tracks. Let's take a listen.
A broader term that we have is called weathering. And so when we think of the weather, if you live in a place where they get a lot of rain, over time, that rain that starts to just simply deteriorates the structure of, say, a home, right? So that's the same thing that happens with the woman's body. And so when we look at the circumstances of Black women and that weathering that they have as they are going through school, and maybe they've had some challenges in school, they were picked on through, teachers, things like that. They may have been suspended for something they didn't do. And the weathering starts to begin even that early. And then you kind of enter into going to college. Maybe you have some incidences there, further weathering. You get into the workforce, you encounter, oh, I didn't get that promotion. I was much more qualified than the people that they chose. Further weathering, right? And so then you get weathering just from having children. Like, that's such an intense activity. We don't really even recognize what carrying another human inside of our body is. I read once that a pregnant woman carrying a baby every day is like her doing a marathon, right? And it just really made me think about how we minimize pregnancy for women. Like, oh, women get pregnant and have babies, da, 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 da. But women who actually have babies and are pregnant know what it's like. They know what that's like, right? That is not a simple task. So that weathering, and then you go into the ultimate hormonal disruption time in a woman's life. And then that Black woman is depleted. She's depleted. So her experience in menopause, her perimenopausal experience are like off the charts, right? Which is why we see Black women and Latino women suffering more severely with symptoms, suffering longer with symptoms. And then, they also, when they show up in healthcare, they are not listened to. So a lot of them come in with these symptoms and go out with no solutions. Go in, come out with nothing. And this can go on for years. And finally, they get to a point where they're relegated to suffering. I meet so many Black women and Latina women who just suffer through menopause, and it's ridiculous. And these are women who have means. I'm not even talking about women who don't have means, right? These are women who can go to specialists and just based on how they've been treated, relegate themselves to just, I'll just suffer through this.
This episode was a powerful reminder that menopause is not a disease. It's not something we suffer through. It is a transition. And when we have the right information, we can navigate it with power. And speaking of power, let's talk about a hormone that has been completely misunderstood for women, testosterone. Dr. Susan Hardwick-Smith set the record straight in our next highlight. This is from episode number 42, The Truth About Testosterone for Women in Midlife with Dr. Susan Hardwick-Smith. Testosterone, we know, remains one of the most misunderstood hormones in women's health. And in my conversation with Dr. Hardwick-Smith, board-certified gynecologist and founder of the Complete Midlife Wellness Center in Houston, Texas, we explored the vital role testosterone plays in women's health and why it's often overlooked in treatment. Dr. Hardwick-Smith shared that women actually produce more testosterone throughout their lives than estradiol, though about 10 times less than men. This hormone peaks around age 25 to 30 and gradually declines with age, often leading to noticeable changes during perimenopause and menopause. Testosterone is not just a male hormone. It plays a huge role in energy, confidence, and yes, libido. And yet it's rarely talked about. When it comes to women's health, Dr. Hardwick-Smith reminds us that there are treatments available. But once again, we have to be our own advocates. Let's listen into this clip from this episode.
Testosterone is not a male hormone. It's a hormone that both men and women have. In fact, the fact that you might hear quite frequently talked about now is we actually make more testosterone throughout our lives as women than estradiol, which is an amazing fact. Now, we make 10 times less than men, but we still make an enormous amount. The reason why that's often misunderstood is because the measurement units are different. If you look at a piece of paper, the numbers look different. And if you look closely, the measurement units are different. You actually have to multiply testosterone by 10 to make it equal estradiol if you're looking at your labs. So that's just something that we were not taught. And so it's so fascinating. But men and women have testosterone. It's highest at around 25 to 30 years old, and then it slowly declines. And that happens for men. Of course, we all know about that, right? There's low testosterone clinics everywhere, and that's very well understood and accepted. But the same exact thing happens for women. And guys, I support them doing this. They'll complain about libido dropping, getting fat around the middle, losing energy, maybe some erectile dysfunction, losing muscle mass, just not feeling great. And off they go and they get their testosterone checked and it's low and it's replaced. And they have upwards of 20 FDA approved testosterone products that are available for them to help them with this really important issue with midlife and beyond. Well, women have exactly the same thing, and our list of complaints are exactly the same, and we have exactly 0 FDA-approved products to help us with that. But luckily, we can get testosterone very safely replaced now in the amount that's appropriate for females. We don't want acne, oily skin, any of those things. I take it. I don't have any of those things. So testosterone is a really interesting hormone, and it has so many benefits for men and also for women. We've had it our whole lives. So if we're thinking about replacing our hormones, we don't want to forget about that one. Yes, estradiol, super important. No doubt the most important for our reduction of chronic disease and multiple other things. Progesterone, very important. But testosterone, let's not forget about it. It's been there all of our lives. So all three are really important.
I hope this episode busted the myth for you that testosterone is not just a male hormone. It plays a huge role in energy, confidence, and yes, libido. And yet it's rarely talked about when it comes to women's health. I love that Dr. Hardwick-Smith reminds us that there are treatments available. But once again, we have to be our own advocates. And finally, let's talk about the foundation of it all. vulvar health. Dr. Maria Uloko gave us a metaphor I will never forget in episode number 15, Nurturing Your Vulva Garden, a Path to Renewed Pleasure in Midlife. As we journey through midlife, our bodies undergo numerous changes. One area that often gets overlooked but deserves our utmost attention is our vulvar health. Dr. Uloko, a trailblazing urologist, introduces us to a powerful metaphor. Your vulva is a garden, and just like any garden, it requires proper care, nourishment, and attention to thrive. This conversation was one of the most empowering, practical, and fun conversations we've had on the podcast. Let's listen into this explanation from Dr. Uloko. Can you walk us
Yes.
through exactly what is happening and why does vulval health matter so much?
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about this because I am a big believer in preventative medicine. And I'm also a big believer that you can have the same vulva at 20, at 100 years old, if
Yay!
you
I like that.
just learned about your vulvar health and how to keep it healthy. And I'll give several things. So, like again, I said the vulva is a garden. If you do not water your garden, you cannot expect cucumbers this season,
Mhm.
right? And also, the beauty of the vulva is that once you give it the nutrients that it needs, your garden will come back. And it is truly miraculous and fascinating. So, the things that keep the vulva healthy, again, estrogen and testosterone are both vital hormones for vulvar health. And that is the thing that want everyone to know about. Vaginal estrogen is important, but it is one part of the equation. And we really got to start amplifying that message because without these specific hormones, what happens is that your tissue changes, your labia start to disappear without estrogen, your vaginal opening actually start close up. So now your urethra, which is the hole that you pee out of, and your vagina, which had a nice healthy distance prior to menopause, perimenopause, are now right on top of each other. This change is important because also the good bacteria that was previously there that used to keep your vagina very acidic, that needs hormones to stay alive, die out. Without your vagina being acidic, that now means that all this bad bacteria can now come and colonize your vagina. And now that your vagina and your bladder are right on top of each other, this actually does predispose you to getting more infections. Other things is that skin changing, that thinning, the inflammation that happens, the dryness that happens, because now the glands that were lubricating and give you that wet feelings, they don't have any water anymore, right? They don't have nutrients to fill them up. And so no longer are they able to do those things. And so that's why a lot of perimenopausal, menopausal, postmenopausal people will develop UTIs or UTI-like symptoms, pain with sex, or difficulty with arousal, because hormones are also needed for blood flow. When we decrease the hormones, we decrease the blood flow, which also leads to decreased sensation. And also, all of this could be prevented. Like, that's the beauty of this, is that it is all preventable with low dose vaginal hormones.
My biggest takeaway from this episode with Dr. Uloko is that vulvar health is crucial for sexual, urinary, and reproductive wellness, but has long been overlooked, leading to silent suffering for so many. Your vulva is more than just a part of your body. It's a complex ecosystem that plays a crucial role in your overall health and well-being. If there's one thing I hope you take away from today, is that your body deserves care. Your pleasure is non-negotiable, and you have the power to advocate for yourself. 50 episodes in, and if I had to sum up everything I've learned in one sentence, it would be this. Pleasure is about connection. Yes, it's about intimacy. Yes, it's about sensuality. But more than anything, pleasure is about the ways we connect to ourselves, to our bodies, to our lives, and to others. And most of all, to the things that light us up. And that, my friends, is the foundation of everything we've talked about in these 50 episodes. Yes, first and foremost, Pleasure is about connection to yourself, feeling in tune with your body, your emotions, your desires, understanding what feels good, what excites you, what makes you come alive. And here's the key. Pleasure starts with safety. It starts with feeling at home in your own body, being able to soothe and regulate your nervous system so you can slowly build the capacity to experience more pleasure and sexual pleasure if that's where you want to go. And pleasure is about connection to life itself, the simple everyday moments that make us feel alive, the warmth of sun on your skin, the rhythm of your breath and movement, the sound of music that stirs something deep inside of you, the pleasure of touch, of laughter, of beauty. This is what makes life rich. And when we open ourselves to it, pleasure becomes a daily practice, not just something reserved for the bedroom. And pleasure is about connection to others, deepening intimacy, strengthening relationships, expressing yourself fully and unapologetically. When we learn to embrace pleasure, we also learn to be more open, more vulnerable, more willing to show up as our full, authentic selves. And finally, pleasure is about connection to what lights you up. Whatever it is that makes your soul say yes, the things that bring you joy, that inspire you, that make you feel powerful and unstoppable. Pleasure is not just about sex. It's about living fully, about following your curiosity, about saying yes to the things that bring you energy instead of drain you. But here's the most important thing I've learned after 50 episodes. You cannot advocate for your pleasure if you don't first understand your body. If we want to fully embrace pleasure, we have to start by knowing ourselves, and that means getting curious about our hormones, our biology, and how our bodies actually work. It means unlearning the outdated myths we were taught about menopause and sexuality. It means asking questions, seeking answers, and taking charge of our own well-being. We have to empower ourselves with knowledge so that we can be the best advocates for ourselves in and out of the bedroom. Because let's be real, if we don't advocate for our pleasure, who will? So here's my question for you as we wrap up this milestone episode. Where are you craving more connection in your life? What is one way you can invite more pleasure, more joy, more beauty, more aliveness into your day today? And most importantly, what is one step you can take toward knowing your body and your hormones better so that you can take charge of your pleasure and your power? If you've been with me for these 50 episodes, thank you. If you're just joining, welcome. We're just getting started. So stay tuned for more conversations, more discoveries, and more permission to own our pleasure, our power, and our connection to ourselves. Until next time, remember, your pleasure matters. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Pleasure in the Pause. Want to help me spread more pleasure in the world? Hit the share episode button and send it to a friend or post it on your Instagram stories and tag me, Gabriella Espinosa. And if you really love this podcast, please leave a rating or review as this helps the show get in front of new listeners. Finally, if you would like to access even more pleasure and stay in touch, sign up for my free pleasure upgrade bundle of powerful mind-body practices by going to pleasureinthepause.com. Remember, your pleasure matters.